Viewers regularly tell me out of general fear for my health and sanity that I should play more good games. Actual videos on good games tend to get lousy view numbers, but I see their point. So rather than just playing one game that I like, I'm going to revisit a whole series that I like, and take a retrospective look at the Star Fox franchise, a series that I kinda grew up with and have always enjoyed, but also a series that's fascinating to revisit due to its, shall we say, rocky history? Why make a retrospective on Star Fox of all series? I don't know, really. I guess I was just in the mood for it for some reason. Despite me being a big fan of the series, I did not play the original Star Fox until I acquired a Super Nintendo Classic a few years back. I don't own a Super Nintendo, and this was like the one major Nintendo game that never saw a virtual console release for the Wii, Wii U, or 3DS. The plot is that the evil monkey lord Andross is trying to take over the Lilat system, and it falls to an elite group of pilots, the Star Fox team, to stop him. Except I was surprised at just how many widely associated staples of the series are not present in the original game. The Star Fox team are members of the Army instead of a mercenary squad, there's no Great Fox mothership, no introductory scene aside from this ominous Star Wars homage, your wingmen have no personality whatsoever. In fact, if your wingmen get shot down, they die off permanently. Not dark enough for you? It was originally canon that the Star Fox team all had their legs amputated and replaced with prosthetics because people thought that was how G-Force worked back then. Then in 64, they just established the R-Wings have magic devices that nullify G-Forces because someone was way too hung up on the physics of cartoon animals flying spaceships. Star Fox is a rail shooter where you fly a plane and have to dodge obstacles and enemy fire while shooting down foes. You only have 3 lives unless you kill as many enemies as possible to get continues, which is a really good system to encourage aggressive gameplay because you're gonna friggin' need those continues. The graphics don't look too impressive by today's standards, a bunch of rough featureless polygons sporadically mixed with obvious 2D sprites, but back in the halcyon days of the Super Nintendo, this was a real technical achievement. But as long as you can easily tell what's going on at all times, which you can, the graphics don't matter too much, and the game is still exhilarating to play. A lot of enemies come at you fast and furious, you're firing like mad at a lot of targets, and if you're not on your toes, you will die. The gameplay is quick, intense, and after a bit of an adjustment period, a ton of fun. As impressive as Star Fox was for its day, it is kind of a rough ride now. The frame rate slows down and speeds up near constantly, which can really screw with your flying. You can switch camera angles, and I swear the first-person view makes the game run faster, but the controls freeze up for several long seconds every time you change the camera. It took some time to get used to dodging fire and shooting at the same time since the camera is a little too dead-on and blocks your view of enemies, but probably the biggest irritant to me is just how cheap the game's design can be. A lot of enemies will just straight up try to crash into you in ways that are difficult to dodge, and it can take pure memorization to get past, like these huge mantas that rise up through the screen that you just have to boost through to increase your chances of not dying. The kamikaze mentality extends to the bosses that will regularly just fly up to you and take up the entire damn screen until you've died enough times to guess how to avoid them on accident. Like seriously, this douchebag in Venom's airspace, how the hell do you dodge this? And again, very limited lives and continues. Thank crap for the Super Nintendo Classic save states, huh? But extending a game with cheap deaths that send you back was really common back then. So I guess I can't complain about the game being a product of its time. I will, however, complain about Course 3 for that cheapness reaching such critical mass that I rage quit at the 2nd level. There are 3 campaigns that all have different stages to give the game some replay value, and it's nice that they're basically easy, medium, and hard difficulties. But sweet crap on toast is the hard course a ball buster. Loads of enemies fire projectiles as they die or huck big-ass meteors, all that you can barely dodge. Some fire dozens of fireballs at once as they die. It tries to lock you into the first-person view where tons of shit and several boss attacks whop you from off-screen. It never freaking ends. I died for 20 minutes straight trying to beat this one level, and I'm saying, screw it. It's weird to see the original direction that the series might have gone because there is some real Star Trek trippy stuff here. Sector Y is filled with giant amoebas and bizarre space life to where you're not entirely sure what to shoot at and what will ignore you as long as you leave it alone. The final fight with Andross takes place in what looks like an alternate dimension from Doctor Strange. There's also an infamous bad ending Easter egg where you can fall into a wormhole, get stuck in limbo, fly through an acid trip, and fight a slot machine as a boss, only to be stuck in basically purgatory for all of time. And no, there is no way out of this level. It's also kind of humorous how I think the true final boss is supposed to be Andross's brain, but I guess they couldn't make a brain, so it's just a cube with Andross's face on each side. On a more awesome note, you fly through spaceships and have boss fights with ship cores, making the most use out of the limited tech to still have distinct levels. I also really like how even though each course ends at Venom, there are 3 completely different Venom levels depending on the difficulty, whereas later Star Fox games have 1 Venom gauntlet in total for the final boss's stronghold. I also like how your wingmen do actually try to help you out and there's no friendly fire, and how smart bombs that tend to fluctuate in usefulness in later games are kind of critical aids to shorten boss battles here. All in all, it's pretty solidly designed. I'd been waiting to play the original Star Fox for ages, and it still holds up for the most part. It's a little rough and it has some cheap design, but it's a product of its time, and they were doing the best they could with less than optimal technology. In fact, Star Fox 64 is a direct remake of the original game, specifically because series executive producer and Nintendo bigwig Shigeru Miyamoto was unhappy with how little of his vision the Super Nintendo could realize. It hasn't aged gracefully and has not got many standout memorable scenes like its successors, but it's still a lot of fun. We're gonna skip over the direct sequel for now, because things really got rolling for this series with a do-over on the Nintendo 64. Star Fox 64 is one of the earliest video games that I remember playing on my Nintendo 64, and it left a humongous impression on me. Probably because I loved spaceship flying games, but Rogue Squadron was too hard and TIE Fighter was over my head at the time. The cheeseball meme lines and performances, the distinct and memorable levels, the fantastic music, it feels like so many elements of this game have become iconic that it's kind of hard to pick a place to start. The plot is pretty basic. The evil mad scientist Andross has invaded the Lilat system with a fleet of battleships, war droids, and whacked-out bioweapons, and the overwhelmed General Pepper hires the elite mercenary Star Fox Squadron and their super badass specialized R-Wings to retake the whole damn star system by themselves. But the fight is personal for team leader Fox McCloud because Andross killed his father, and he's out to settle the score. Joining the kinda flat and one-dimensional Fox on his quest are 3 meme-spewing sidekicks: his borderline senile mentor and barrel roll enthusiast Peppy Hare,
Do a barrel roll!
the tech nerd whose squeaky voice made me swear that he was a girl for the longest time, Slippy Toad,
Yippee! You did it!
and the alleged ace pilot in near constant need of rescuing and being a dick about it, Falco Lombardi. Seriously, the first time I played the game, I swear Falco got shot down every single level.
See my ship? Does it look okay to you?
The game is by and large a rail shooter again, but no longer held back by the console's technology. The controls are fast and responsive, and the levels are colorful, detailed, and eye-catching even today. They added 2 new playable vehicles, including 2 kick-ass tank missions, but most importantly, they added the all-range mode, where Star Fox 64 becomes, an actual flying game with an open map flying in any direction. They make the most they can with the seemingly limited gameplay, and no 2 levels play quite the same. Each level is distinct, for better or for worse, and there are so many missions that stuck with me as being super memorable. Sector Y blasting through a fleet with tons of hectic enemies, the dark and creepy submarine level on Aqua's battling bizarre monsters, the foreboding trek through Sector X and the ominous wreckage of an enemy base. I always loved the asteroid field for the Star Wars vibes and tons of rocks to shoot at, the Katina base homaging Independence Day with bad guys swarming like flies, Macbeth nuking the ever-loving shit out of a massive train, the final charge through Area 6 as Andross's army throws everything in the kitchen sink in a desperate bid to take you down, and of course, the battle on Fortuna. It starts with you trying to reclaim a base from enemy forces, and it's a pretty easy battle, but then you're warned there's a bomb in the base, and right when you're on a time crunch,
Can't let you do that, Star Fox.
the new enemy ace pilots, the Star Wolf Squadron, flies in with one of the greatest themes in video game history, and a tense battle with enemies that have actual brains begins. Okay, granted, if you haven't been screwing up and get here with hyper lasers, the level is piss easy, but still, Not all the stage gimmicks are winners. I'm not particularly fond of the stealth level on Zonas where you have to dodge and shoot at searchlights. Solar, the stressful lava world where you're constantly taking damage. Is that supposed to be the sun? And I hate Sector Z where you have to protect your flagship, the Great Fox, from frustratingly durable missiles. But they're all good ideas, and the bitching is just my personal preference. The big gimmick of Star Fox 64 is that while there are a lot of levels, you only get to play 7 of them per playthrough. Most levels have a secret objective that if you complete, you get to play an alternate stage outside of the basic path to Venom. Most of the secret objectives are obvious. Don't screw up against Starwolf, don't let the Sector X boss kill Slippy when he suicide charges it like a dumbass. But some of them, like flying through the stone arches on Corneria, I have no idea how you're meant to figure them out without reading them in the instruction book, but it's a clever way to keep you replaying the game. There's no level select option, so if you want to replay one of the more iconic and kick-ass stages, you have to earn it, and it's all the more satisfying for doing so. The alternate paths through the game culminate in there being 2 different final stages, a fake ending against an Andross robot, and the true ending with a way more difficult rematch with Starwolf, and killing Andross's true form as a giant brain with detachable eyeballs! Jeez and Royce! Good to see that some of the drug-fueled insanity of the original survived through. Oh, and there's an ongoing mystery in the series of whether or not Fox's father, James McCloud, is still alive that's continually teased but has never been resolved. Not helping confusion is that James McCloud is also the name of an F-Zero character who looks exactly like the Star Fox character except for the fact that, he's a man. I guess Andross didn't kill James, he just exiled him to a dead franchise. That was supposed to be funny, but instead it's just sad. I know there's a hard mode in the game and a way to unlock people on foot for the multiplayer, but I am nowhere near good enough to actually unlock them. Getting high scores to get the medals that open the hard mode requires friggin' mastery with the homing laser to rack up multi-kills to boost your score, and it's just not a skill that I ever picked up. I can give General Pepper a heart attack when he gets the bill for all the enemies I killed, though! The funny thing about Star Fox 64 is that there's not actually anything too remarkable about its game design. Rail shooter stages are kind of inherently limited, and the open stages aren't nearly as big or complex as the likes of Rogue Squadron, much less flight games on the PC. I think the presentation of Star Fox 64 is what makes it stick with you. The music is fantastic, conveying moods of adventure, danger, mystery, pumping action, and triumph. The dialogue is overacted, but just the right kind of ham-filled and endlessly quotable. The fun Saturday morning cartoon vibe, even little secrets and Easter eggs like hidden level warps and being able to feed Andross bombs gives the game a little mystique. It's not that anything about Star Fox 64 is particularly phenomenal, it's just a really fun game masterfully crafted to be a memorable experience, and it's still a title that I can easily revisit and have a blast anytime. So after Star Fox 64 lit the Nintendo 64 on fire, became one of the most iconic games on the platform, and catapulted Fox into being one of Nintendo's staple franchises, everyone was psyched to see what the next-gen GameCube would do with the franchise. So next came Star Fox Adventures, where Fox travels to a planet of sentient dinosaurs and uses a magic staff to navigate ancient temples looking for relics and magic spirits, while melee fighting with an army of raptors with a Kid Triceratops sidekick. Well, that's a direction to take the series, I guess. Adventures originally went into production as Dinosaur Planet, a new third-party IP mascot platformer from Rare about a brother and sister duo, Saber and Crystal, saving a world of dinosaurs from the evil General Scales using magic. But when Shigeru Miyamoto got a look at the game and realized that Saber looked friggin' exactly like Fox, he suggested reskinning the game into a Star Fox title. Karma would later bite the franchise in the ass when a prototype Star Fox game was reskinned into Kid Icarus Uprising. Development was also complicated by Rare taking so damn long to make the game that they ended up having to convert it from a Nintendo 64 title to the GameCube, which led to more chaos as devs lost track of what all had changed. I know that people want me to talk in depth about the prototype Dinosaur Planet that never was, but the thing about that is, I don't care! The game begins with Crystal, a brave, kind-hearted warrior woman seeking answers on her destroyed homeworld, responding to a distress call from Dinosaur Planet, only to immediately lose her magic staff weapon, find one of the magic spirit MacGuffins, and then get captured and held captive in an ancient palace. The game then cuts over to Team Star Fox, having fallen on hard times since Lylat has been peaceful since Star Fox 64, also getting assigned to check out Dinosaur Planet because the world is exploding and General Pepper would much rather it not. Fox finds Crystal's staff, teams up with a prince named Tricky, and has to fight through ancient temples and fortresses to track down 4 spell stones to contain the planet's magic so that it stops blowing up. Okay, I don't really care about the details of the game's messy development, but I would like to know how Crystal got demoted from co-protagonist to damsel in distress. In addition to the 4 spell stones, you also need to find 5 Krazoa spirits, and they have literally nothing to do with anything. You're just told that you need to find them to save the naked blue girl.
Wow, she's beautiful.
It's not until the very end of the game that they go, oh crap, yeah, you need the spirits to put the world back together. Did everybody forget to mention that? You have this charming, likable, mysterious, highly marketable Jedi cat lady, a badass magic tribal warrior that fits right into the game's pre-industrial setting and who is heavily featured in the game's marketing like she's a big new character, and she just spends the entire game tied up in a closet? What the hell? Star Fox Adventures is a puzzle platformer, heavy emphasis on the puzzle. The game's combat is extremely shallow and boils down to whack the same endlessly copy-pasted enemy on the head when it looks like they aren't blocking, so the gameplay loop boils down to you are told to go to a place and get a thing, you try to figure out how to get to said place because the maps are completely worthless, and you solve puzzles to get said thing. Said puzzles usually entail looking for switches, figuring out how to transport exploding barrels, sliding blocks, running obstacle courses, and finding places to use either staff powers or Tricky's abilities. The staff powers are fun to play with. You have a super jump, fireballs, ice breath, and earthquake shapeshifting. Stuff that it'd be fun to do as Crystal in Super Smash Bros., but it feels like the fireball and the super jump are the only 2 that get used for like 90% of the puzzles. The big problem is that while a lot of the puzzle temples can be really stimulating and fun, there are also a lot of where the hell do I go scavenger hunts that drag the game to a painful crawl. When you get stuck, and you will, it's a tedious slog to get unstuck. For possibly the only time in the series, Slippy is a critical help to you, since you can call him anytime you want for hints, and you flat out need him to tell you where to go, to explain several Moon Logic puzzle mechanics, or at times to even explain that there is a puzzle. For instance, without Slippy, you're supposed to psychically intuit that several random NPCs you've never talked to and haven't seen for hours will now open the next quest if you talk to them unprompted. I can't honestly decide whether having a character just give you puzzle solutions for free is a sign of lazy game design, or actively fixing the thing that's always turned me off of 3D Zelda. Slippy can't always help you though, and I had to cave and use a walkthrough at the Ocean Force Point Temple. You hit this room with 4 fireball switches that you're told to shoot, only I work my ass off to light them all up, and nothing happens, because turns out there's a hole hidden to the side of the room that looks like it's just part of the wall texture and doesn't do anything. And with absolutely zero hint that you can do this, you're supposed to have Tricky breathe fire into the hole before the puzzle does anything. Yeah, that kind of bullshit. I really do like Star Fox Adventures, but I honestly have a hard time finding positive things to say about it, because while the game is fun when it's firing on all cylinders and you're cruising through levels and puzzles, the puzzles don't feel particularly clever, and you will hit a no seriously where the actual hell do I go moment that just frustrates you into quitting. At least that's the experience most commenters have relayed to me. I still remember perfectly the puzzle that made me rage quit the game for months to a year the first time that I played it. To get to the 4th Krazoa spirit, you go to the Snowhorn Waste and you have an obstacle course where you blow a horn on special platforms. There's just one teeny tiny little problem. I have no idea where the fuck this is! The big thing that annoys you is how the game is loaded down with side quests constantly interrupting what you're doing, to force you to piss off and hunt down more random crap. Can't get the second spellstone unless you track down the queen's kids. Can't talk to the Lightfoot chieftain unless you dick around looking for buried wooden shapes. Can't get to the ocean temple unless you dick around digging for buried treasure. Can't get to the first spellstone's gatekeeper unless you leave and get some medicine for Tricky's mom, which you also can't do unless you screw off and buy a lantern, etc., etc. I don't know exactly why the backtracking gets on my nerves here when it doesn't bother me in Metroid. I think it boils down to how slow and clunky the navigation can be with unnecessarily spread out levels and how the constant detours feel like naked padding. A big point in the game's favor is Dinosaur Planet itself, with its bright, colorful, appealing environments, mystical and mysterious locales, varied denizens of intelligent dinosaurs, and having a pet Triceratops who's basically a chubby puppy that plays fetch. The game has strong world building to get you invested through the weaker gameplay stretches. I know a lot of people find Tricky annoying, but if you're ever pissed at him, you can't always just smack him around with the staff for a little while. Oh shit, Tricky lights you on fire if you piss him off, did not know that! By the way, you think his mom will be mad that I turned him purple? Nah, maybe she won't notice. It really feels like Microsoft's buyout of Rare forced them to rush a huge chunk of development because the entire second half of the game whizzes by. There are no new upgrades past the power to open doors. The return visit to the Ocean Temple is a blatant copy-paste. There's a sharp decline in side quests with the last two Gatekeeper portals being given to you for free. The last two levels are short as crap with basic wide-open layouts. One of them is half rail shooter segments. But the funny thing is, when the game is rushing like hell through the second half of the MacGuffins, the pacing is so much better. And of course I had to play all the way to the end, because I couldn't leave my babe Crystal hanging. You get to the final battle with General Scales only for an unseen other entity to bitch Scales out and force him to surrender before you can throw a single punch. On one hand, we don't actually fight the villain who's been built up all game. On the other hand, he only shows up like twice and has no personality to speak of. Once you return the last spirit and free Crystal, it turns out the whole game's been orchestrated by Andross. He somehow found out about the Krazoa's power and wanted the spirits to magic himself up a new body, and Crystal is the only person who could channel the spirits, and that's why the interesting new character had to spend all game tied up in a closet. Falco comes back because he'd left for some reason, and Andross is dead again.
At least this time we'll see the last of him.
So Dinosaur Planet is saved, Fox gets the money to fix up the team's equipment, and Crystal comes aboard to thank Fox in person.
Well, okay. I mean, sure, no problem.
Hooray! The franchise has a central female presence now! And she's introduced as a near-literal sex object. Yay, progress! And yes, I know that there was a girl in 64, but Cat was barely a cameo. Shut up! Finally, time for a proper continuation of the franchise with the GameCube's Star Fox Assault. This game revolves around an invasion by the Aparoids, an army of insectoid aliens with the ability to assimilate technology and other living creatures into their collective, bent on the subjugation of all life in the universe, and naturally it falls to Team Star Fox to fight them. Except the team's been shuffled up a bit for this adventure. Peppy is retired and now serving as mission control, and Crystal's joined on, using her telepathic powers to fill Peppy's role as person who tells you the boss's weakness is the blatantly obvious glowing light.
I can see it. Its weak point is that center spot.
Star Fox Assault has a pretty good story, if not exactly a deep one. The Aparoids' abilities make them crazy, scary, and intimidating foes. They should be, they were ripped off from the Borg. And not only is it horrifying what we see happen to the living beings that they assimilate, but they attack and grievously wound some pretty big mainstays of the franchise. They're a threat that won't go away by just shooting it, and it leads to great tension. The tone is a lot more serious than prior entries while still remaining fun, and we start to get some actual character development. In prior games, every member of the team was as flat and one-dimensional as you can get, but now, Fox has a girlfriend. Now he's conflicted between wanting Crystal on the team and wanting to keep her out of danger. struggling with how to handle the relationship since she's a lot more open and flirty about it than he is, and it's hinted that she's driven him to mature between his noticeably deeper voice and not being whiny like he was in Adventures. It's nothing major or in your face, but Crystal's presence changes the team's dynamic for the better, and gives Fox motivations beyond just blowing up everything in sight. Even Wolf gets deeper characterization as a neutral outlaw whose rivalry with Fox is based in mutual respect, and he's found a moral code. They were making active efforts and strides towards making the cast into actual characters. Oh, and there's a new planet called Ficina, which was supposed to be the name of Fortuna in 64 because Fortuna was a jungle planet in the original game, even though 64 was a reboot and there was no jungle planet, and Dinosaur Planet is now called Saria. How does a series that literally opens with a look at the entire star system keep misplacing and finding new planets? The series' traditional R-Wing flying combat and rail shooter bits make their expected return, looking fantastic and controlling great. The rail shooter segments get fast and frantic, just like classic Star Fox, while the all-range levels control just a little bit sluggish, but I think I know why. But as good as the flying levels are, there's a hitch. Of the game's 10 levels, only 4 of them are actual flying missions. Well, 4 with additional skirmishes and 3 other stages. Point is, the other half of the game, you're running around on foot, partaking in armed gun combat with enemy troops, or tearing things up in the Landmaster tank. So why does Nintendo's big space combat flying franchise now have a huge emphasis on third-person shooting? Well, apparently Miyamoto has a standing mandate that a Star Fox game cannot go into production unless it has a big innovation over prior entries in the series. Remember that! It's going to bite this franchise in the ass later! Honestly, despite being a major divisive factor among fans, the ground combat is pretty good. You have a wide variety of weapons to collect for different situations. All of them are pretty fun and useful. You've got smooth controls with strafing to dodge fire and auto lock-on so you don't have to be uber precise. There's a good variety of enemies, and the baddies are well balanced to where there's a lot of them, but if you play halfway sensibly, you're not overwhelmed. So if the third-person shooter combat is well designed, why do these levels tend to stick in players' craws so much? Honestly, I think the problem is annoying mission design. Levels 2, 6, and 9, you have to wander around a huge map that's not terribly conducive to the Landmaster, finding hidden entrances into indoor caves to hit objectives. It gets annoying fast, especially in the Aperoid Homeworld level where I spent at least 10 minutes wandering in circles trying to find the door to the last hatcher until I found out you just need to blow open a door that isn't marked as destructible. The Homeworld level is a pretty kick-ass map otherwise, but not when you pull this crap! Level 3 is a unique vertical climbing stage, but if you fall, you have a long hike back up, and Level 4 has long stretches of dead air tediously slogging between generators. It doesn't help that ground missions tend to be obnoxiously scant on checkpoints, and some of them have the might gauge. If you take too long to finish a mission, the game adds insult to injury, forcing you to abandon what you're doing to shoot down some enemies in the sky so that your wingmen don't get overwhelmed. Because 3 veteran pilots in the highest performance fighters in the system still can barely hit any targets. See, Crystal fits right in. Namco's way of making your wingmen useful is to have them drop items for you when you save them, which is a pretty good idea. There's something else that Crystal could drop for me, but that's neither here nor there. I think the most memorable stage in the game is the Siege on Corneria, where you're dropped into a massive city map overrun by enemies around every corner, and you have to use a sniper rifle to take out radar jammers in the sky. It's cool to see the city up close, it's daunting to see basically the center of the government overrun, it's a tense and complex level, and it's awesome! The 2 rail shooter segments are pretty good too. You have to admit, Namco knows their way around arcade action. They were a good choice for the developer. The game is really short, clocking in at roughly 2.5 hours for one playthrough. Apparently Miyamoto intentionally structured Star Fox 64 to play like a movie and made Assault short accordingly, but by the time of the GameCube's generation and without multiple pass through the game for replay value, it feels a lot like Nintendo is passing off a bug as a feature with this one. Oh, but if you get medium difficulty medals in the levels, you unlock a bonus game, Xevious on the NES! Have you played Xevious? I have! It sucks! As much as I hate to say it, the multiplayer is really damn good and adds much needed value to the game, with a mix of ground, tank, and aircraft combat on several huge, wildly varied, well-designed levels, including trips to Zonus and Titania that aren't in the game proper. You can even unlock a Wolfen to fly and play as Wolf. But I can't help but wonder if balancing the multiplayer isn't why the R-Wings control a little sluggishly in all-range mode. Keep the multiplayer combat balanced so the dude with a jet doesn't win by default and all that. Star Fox Assault has by far my favorite atmosphere and tone that I've seen yet for this universe. It's a dark story with high emotional stakes as it goes on, but it never turns full grim, and the epic scope of the conflict makes the final level charging on the Aperoid Queen a total rush as they properly build up just how desperate the war is. It's the most dramatic story that's been done in Star Fox, though that isn't saying much given most of the series entries barely have a story to speak of. There are certain aspects of the visual design that I'm not fond of, though. They made the ships and tech look as complicated as possible to show development from the first game, and apart from the sleeker Great Fox, the non-Aperoid ships are pretty ugly. The R-Wings and Landmasters look fragile as hell with all the bits just kinda sticking off of them, the Wolfens are overly busy gibberish, and a lot of the other vessels look like knockoff Transformers toys that poorly transform into mechs. Probably because half of them do. I'm also not wild about the Star Fox crew's new uniforms. I know they wanted each character to look distinct for the multiplayer, but the new flight suits just look bland. All except for Crystal's skin-tight Black Widow suit. I mean, yowza! Solar is now the second hottest thing in the Lilat system. I am really glad the whole amputate legs dissolve G-Force thing isn't canon anymore, cause any rat bastard tries to cut off any part of this goddess, I'ma have to throw them down a volcano! I really wish this design was more popular for Crystal than her bikini from Adventures, but the Smash Ultimate Assist trophy has spoken, I suppose. Even if Star Fox Assault isn't what fans were hoping for out of the series, I think it's still a pretty dang good game. It's a good story well told, and the levels, while they have some problems, get in some great variety without it feeling like the game is stretched too thin. If they fixed the map design and made the game longer, this is definitely the direction that I would have liked to see the series continue. This is the major flaw with Miyamoto's idea that every Star Fox game has to reinvent the wheel with some pretense of innovation. Just take the game that was good and refine it into a better sequel. Don't pitch everything out in search of a new gimmick for the next one. But such was not meant to be. Before we break for part 2, I have a question that's been bugging me for years. I distinctly remember being in a GameStop back in the day and seeing a prominent ad for a game called Star Fox Armada, which had the same graphical design as Assault when it came out later. I never saw anything about it again. Was Armada a working title, or did I just dream that whole thing? Huh.